Alright, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. Unfortunately today I've got my camera blacked out because behind me is a ton of sunlight. It's so, I'll open up my camera for a moment. It's so bright that there's almost no, so if I put my head in just the right spot. But yeah, there's not a lot of point to that. So I'm just going to leave the camera closed out and we'll take a look at the deck. So here is the deck that I want to focus on today. It is the Tevesh, Szat, Rograkh Bullszat deck. And it's performing pretty well. I've made a couple of small changes to it. Praetor's Grasp is in, Orcish Settlers are in, which are like a stone rain that for every 2 extra mana you pump into them will destroy an additional land. So 5 mana for 2, 7 for 3, and so forth. And Infernal Plunge, which is basically just calling the weak -1 additional pip, and also the wrong color. But calling it does allow for some really interesting things. One of which, for example, is just turn 1 Jessica's Will, where you won't get the cards, but you'll get 7 mana. And typically, if you've got 7 mana in your opening hand, first turn, you can probably find a way to win most games from there. So it's a very powerful, having this in a deck with this and a commander like this is a very powerful combination of things that you can add to your deck. So I decided I wanted to. Basically my thinking is if this isn't an Infernal Plunge deck, then probably no deck is. And so we'll see how that works out. But I would assume it is correct, especially with extra Tevesh, Szat counters and so forth. So it's the same logic behind adding Phyrexian Tower, although this is at least a land drop. And this is not, but sometimes being a land drop is a advantage, and sometimes it's a drawback, like when you're drawing multiple cards per turn, which this deck does fairly frequently. Not too many other changes, I'd say. I mean, Praetor's Grasp has been in and out of the deck. So I just want to cover one particular game, and that's the purpose of this video today. And that game is this game against I'm a Donkey. I've featured some games against this opponent before. This is a very savvy and challenging opponent. Unfortunately, playing probably what I find to be just the most droll and terrible commander in the format. Boring as all anything. Basically, the Ragavan deck and the Bullszat deck, you employ the same strategy. So it's like, well, how can you complain about one and play the other? It basically comes down to the fact that I think it's more interesting to try to figure out how to make 5 mana than it is to try to figure out how to make 1. I find that to be incredibly boring. Because the opponent's combo, their big combo is Mountain. That's their combo card with their commander. Whereas in this deck, the combo is a series of rituals and fast mana and sacrifices and things that you do to try to get that commander into play in a relevant and timely manner. And I just find the hoops I've got to jump through to get there to make playing the deck more interesting and exciting. And the fact that sometimes I can't even base my gameplay around my commander and have to play a regular game using my regular cards, to me makes it more interesting. Whereas in a Ragavan deck, your gameplay is based around Ragavan. That's just the way it is because that commander's too cheap and it wouldn't make sense any other way. So yeah, but having said all that, no knock on my opponent or their choices. It's not my preference, that's what I'm expressing, but this is a very challenging opponent and it's important to test against everything, even though I find it somewhat distasteful. I can only take so much testing against Ragavan before I just am like sick of it, because it's almost like I'm testing against myself. I'm basically excuse me, I'm basically testing my deck to see, can I get fast mana on turn 2 or removal? And so I don't know how exciting that is, and after a while it just feels like I'm causing myself a bunch of stress for no reason. The stress of trying to make that happen every time. But having said all that, typically if the Bullszat deck is able to perform before Ragavan gets going, then you almost always win. So I mean, it's not that It's not that it's a bad matchup. It's just, oof. Anyway, this is a very good example, however, of a game where my opponent gets a great start, puts me in a horrible position, and you can see this game is representative of a couple of things. One, the recovery power of the Bullszat deck, and why I think it's a far more interesting deck than something like Ragavan, which is super linear. But also the what I mean when I say that you can play your deck and you don't just have to play your commander. Now, we are taking heavy advantage of Rograkh, our 0-drop, in this deck. So we are definitely using that as a tool and using our commander just as heavily as the Ragavan deck uses its. And that is the correct thing to do, and why I don't hold any ill will for somebody doing that. But not that it would matter, because it's perfectly valid and makes sense in a commander-based format anyway. But having said that, the real commander that the deck's built around is clearly Tevesh. Rog is an engine to get to Tevesh. And so that's the one that may not play much of a role in this particular game, as you'll see. All right, so let's take a look. This is a keep because I'm going first. So because I'm going first, I get to go shop, signet, right? Shop, arcane signet, Rakdos signet, pass. Well, commander, pass. And this is where I mean about taking advantage of the 0-1. Presumably my opponent goes land, mountain, and plays their combo. And then on my turn, I just equip Sword of Fire and Ice, and I play it for 3, equip Sword of Fire and Ice for 2, swing in, kill their commander, and throw red even to make their life even harder. And hopefully within the next 2 cards I find some mana sources. Now we're pretty much off to the races, potentially just winning the game on turn 2. So a hand that can win on turn 2 is a hand that we want to keep. So we're going to keep this. Wrong button. And so I'm going to lead out. Now you have to be very careful the order you deploy these in. You always want to think carefully before you play your cards, no matter how much confident you are that you know what play you're about to make. At least stop yourself and double check, because in this case, if I were to play Rakdos Signet, I'd have 1 mana from Workshop floating, which cannot be used to activate an artifact, only to play one, and I would be unable to activate the Rakdos Signet, and therefore unable to play the Arcane Signet, and my entire game plan would fall apart. So just a word of caution there. So I go Arcane Signet first, tap. Now I've got 2 mana, so I can play the Rakdos and throw down the Rog. So now all I need Amadonkey to do is go land, Ragavan. Wait, you're not following the script, opponent. So first turn Soul Ring into Tome of Legends. Yuck. Okay, well, now the goal is to try to keep Ragavan off the table as much as possible. Get rid of this Tome and this Soul Ring, and excuse me, and of course develop. And so in light of that, I'm still going to make the same play, but it's not going to be anywhere near as good for me, because now they know, and since Ragavan also has dash, they can work their dashed Ragavan around my Sword of Fire and Ice. So now it's going to be kind of a value race until one of us can get artifact kill and probably win the game. So will I get mass artifact kill first, or will they, is really the question. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and play the Marsh Flats here. My opponent has a great turn here, obviously, with the Tome. They get to play a dashed Ragavan, putting a counter on the Tome, drawing a card immediately. I think that was done in the wrong order. They should have drawn first just to see if maybe they wanted to change their play. But then again, Ragavan's such a narrow strategy that for the most part you can be pretty safe that what you want to do is put the monkey into play. Alright, so they're going to swing in here. There's nothing I can do. They get another counter on Tome. I'm going to have to let it hit me and just cross my fingers and hope that it doesn't destroy me. I'm very lucky. My opponent exiles Phyrexian Tower. Thank goodness it wasn't something more brutal from my deck, because my deck could have just killed me basically right there. Opponent plays a Mox Diamond as well, and has, of course, the treasures. They've got 3 more mana, and uses one of it to Skull Clamp, and then the second one to clamp Ragavan before it bounces back to their hand and draw 2 cards. I agree with this play, and this is correct. And my opponent is now at 5 cards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mana, 5 cards in hand, plus 7, 8 2 more cards, so 8 cards total. But this card represents 2 or 3, and this card represents like 4-ish. So in reality, my opponent has access to about, we'll just say, I don't know, 5, 8, 12, 16 cards roughly, and it's turn 2. Meantime, I've got 4, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I'm not too far behind. As far as mana goes, they've got 5, 6, and I've got 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm actually about to be ahead on mana, funny enough. Even though my opponent's start is incredibly good. But only for workshops. Curse is really nice here. Free, so let's just get it down, and then it'll start generating mana on subsequent turns. Go ahead and play the Jitte. So this might allow me to stop them from clamping. If I can get counters on Jitte, then if they play Ragavan and go to clamp, they'll still get a counter for Tome, but when they try to clamp, I'll just ping it in response. It'll also prevent him from hitting me. I'll -1 and kill it in response. So it'll also prevent him from hitting me, which means that this Jitte now, with a couple counters on it, stops him from drawing 2 from that, plus 1 from the Rag hit. So it's going to stop 1 mana and 3 cards with just this 1 Jitte. So we're definitely going to play this here and swing in. And get a token. Connect. Draw a card. Now I'm really, really hoping for Vandal Blast, or Replicating Blast, or Thought Seize, Duress, Inquisition, something like that, right? Instead, what I get is Jessica's Will. Could be good if my opponent, especially if on this next turn they draw cards with Tome of Legends, don't have a way to kill Jitte, and therefore don't do much, and then sit there with a bunch of cards in their hand, and Jessica's Will just win the game for me next turn. So that's kind of what we're hoping is going to happen here. Is that they start digging and don't find a solution. Or that they're, maybe they remove the Jitte, right, with some of their mana. Then they play like Rag, and then clamp it and Tome, and draw like a bunch of cards, and then I can Jessica's for a ton of mana, and then ad nauseum them. I won't have Jitte, but small price to pay, right? Unfortunately, none of that goes according to plan. Instead, what happens is a very horrifying play for me, in which my opponent plays by force for X equals 5. And I thought about pumping the Rog here in response, and you should consider that. Like, for example, if my opponent has a Shock in response, but nobody plays Shock anymore, it would have to be a Bolt. And if I pumped it once and then pumped it a second time, they could still Bolt it, so it really wouldn't save it. So that didn't make a ton of sense. And in addition to that, 4 extra life means more cards down the road with ad nauseum. So for both reasons, I just decide, nah, I'm just going to take the life here. And take the chance that they can also kill Rograkh with some kind of red direct damage spell, which red is certainly known to play. Instead, opponent clears their attack step and passes for the turn. I don't fetch with the Catacombs because I've just had a ton of mana destroyed, and I'm hoping to find some more. And I do, but it's temporary mana, Dark Ritual. However, that might just be enough to get me back in the game. That was a brutal hit that I just took. 4 artifacts plus a token, plus a Curse of Opulence token. And somehow I'm still back in this game, which is what I mean about the resilience of Bullszat versus a deck. I mean, the red deck certainly is resilient too. Like, I've had Amadonkey come back from crazy deficits and even beat me sometimes with cards like Jessica's Will, but it's harder. It's less consistently able to do that than Black-Red is. And here, I'm just going to go ahead and fetch a basic Swamp. Why make my future fetch lands worse by stripping out the ability to get a dual land? And plus, having basic Swamp's good against mono reds, it might have Blood Moon. Alright, so I need to get back into this game. And now is a perfect opportunity. Before my opponent dumps more cards, I want to Jessica's Will and get as much as I can out of it. So we'll go ahead and do that for both modes. And I see City of Traders. Remember, I have not played a land yet. There's that Badlands I didn't fetch. So now, if I don't play it, it's gone. I did Diabolic Intent. So I give some thought here to what I might do. For example, I might sack the gold token and just play Ad Nauseam with one floating. I could play a Badlands or City of Traders and maybe Diabolic Intent first and do something with it. If you're looking at this board now, what do? And I'll give you a moment to think about it. You should. And then I'm going to proceed through my plays slowly and give you an opportunity to think about each one and then kind of explain my logic. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. So if you haven't paused it yet, now's your last chance, and then we'll go ahead and proceed. Okay, we're going to proceed. So my first thing I do is I know that I am going to Diabolic Intent this turn. I want to get as much mana as possible, and there is a way for me to get... I can Intent for 2 and go get a Mana Crypt and break even and just have more permanence for the next turn. But I actually don't want to go get a Mana Crypt, because if I go get a Mana Crypt, I want to find that with an Ad Nauseam to generate mana. I don't want to find it before I Ad Nauseam, breaking even on mana using 2 to get 2. And then that's one less card that I can hit off the Ad Nauseam and use it to continue to roll forward with my plays. So I actually I'm going to go get a card that's going to actually make potentially more mana than a Mana Crypt, almost certainly more, as a matter of fact, and play very well into this turn. So last chance for you to figure out what I go get now that you understand what I'm doing. Also, I just sacrificed my commanders, so of course I have to put it in the command zone, right? Well, no, I don't actually have to, and I'm not going to. And that should tip you off as to which card I'm going to get. Last hint. Okay, there's the whole deck. You can take a look. We've got 3 mana floating. We can still play a land from exile, so we can get up to City of Traders would give us 5. Gold token would give us 6. Or we could play Badlands to go to 4, and a gold token would give us 5, which would allow us to play Ad Nauseam. So keep in mind that we can still Nause this turn. And of course, that is the full deck list. But if you've thought about it long enough, and the hint was not self-explanatory for you, you're going to slap your forehead when you realize what it is that I went and got. It was Yawgmoth's Will. So with the Yawgmoth's Will, I can now sack the gold token and will with only 1 red floating. Now remember, I had a maximum, I had 4 mana at that point, right? I could have had 5 mana using the Badlands plus the Workshop. So let's see if I can get up to more than 5 mana with the will, right? So I'm going to tap the artifact producing Workshop, and now this is suddenly useful again, because I can play the Signet. Now I can Ritual, so I have 4. City of Traders, that was an option before. We could have gone up to 6 mana, no problem. So we're not ahead actually. So I've got the 6 that I could have had before. But now I get to Jessica's, and now I'm up to 7. And through sheer good luck, I find a Springleaf Drum as part of that. And look, I have exactly 1 artifact mana left. So, boom, we're going to play that, and we can now tap Rog. So we now have 8 mana, where we only had a max of 6 before. Alright, for 2 of those, I'm going to go ahead and kill Rograkh, this time sending him to the command zone, as is proper. And once again, I challenge you, remember, look at the board state, right? So what do we want to get? We have 6 mana. We could go get, for example, Godfrey's Statue, Ugin. We could go get By Force or something similar, such as Vandal Blast. We could go get, I already mentioned Godfrey's Statue. So we have a number of, potential options available to us. So let's see what you select. My choice is just Mana Crypt in this case. This was probably a little bit wasteful. I should have saved Mana Crypt for the exact reason I explained earlier, and just saved my tutor, and left my guy in play, because there's a chance that I hit a ritual that I can only play by sacrificing a creature, and I just killed my guy kind of for no reason in this spot. So I make a mistake here. But I am going to play the Crypt. I didn't actually lose any mana on that, but I lost potential mana as we progress through the turn. And so now I'm going to Ad Nauseam. If you didn't realize that we were 100% going to Ad Nauseam this turn, then if you were thinking, no, Vandal Blast or something, you're missing you're missing out. We will get the mana for Vandal Blast, right? We're still going to try to kill my opponent's board, but we want to do it while drawing a metric ton of cards, right? So Lotus, wonderful. Duress, Orcish Settlers, Chrome Mox, very nice hit. Artisan, not so helpful, and Chandra just hurts. Opal, very, very nice. Confluence, nice. Plunge is okay, but only if we can find a way to get a commander or a creature into play that makes the mana worth. Like, if we spend 2 for Orcish Settlers and 1 to plunge, we end up spending 3 mana to get 3 mana, so that's not really... There's by force, so we got my opponent's board mostly taken care of, but we're looking for more mana. Unfortunately, I'm not going to really be able to see what comes up here too easily. Dust Bowl, Urza's Saga, Dark Confidant, a Blight Step, a few more cards. So now we'll take a look. Yeah, so this was where I stopped. I'm at 12. Starting with Lotus and working your way down and across is what I hit as I was going. I was very disappointed not to hit 1 more mana, because I have a Will running and really, really like to Ugin, and then with Ugin in play, all my Signets and stuff cost 2 less. All my colorless cards cost 2 less. So I could replay Signet and Jete from the graveyard for 0, and maybe just even keep going. If I had Ugin and mana floating, I could play Ugin and then replay my Signet and use it to cast the Sword of Fire and Ice, for example, for 1. So, at any rate, that's where I decided to stop on 12 life, and I might have stopped sooner, but I did gain those 4 off the Jete. So now, let's sequence the turn. So we've got this over here that we can play. Not City, not Badlands, but we can play Acquisition if we want. And I've got a Jeweled Lotus. So as it turns out, we get a Mox Opal down. We'll go ahead and get a Chrome Mox down. We'll exile... Boop! Dark Confidant. Definitely not looking good at 12 life against a mono red deck. Alright, sack the Jeweled Lotus. It gets exiled because we still have Yawgmoth's Will running. Now I can get Biggins down, Big Commander, and Tevesh Szat will produce multiple tokens. Those tokens, with exactly 1 red floating, will now feed a Infernal Plunge. Unfortunately, we won't get to flash it back because the Will's already running, but still really nice. We'll tap for 5, and just 1 short of being able to play Ugin, unfortunately. But we also have more important things we got to do. We got to deal with these artifacts. So I want to deal with these artifacts, and I want to make potentially other plays as well. The question is, what do you do next from here? We've got this card we can play, these cards we can play, and all these cards we can play. No more land drops, though. Well, I decide, kind of back and forth on it, but I decided to go ahead and Inquisition, and I see this. Ugin, Crater Maker, and Mism Mortars. Now, Crater Maker will actually kill an Ugin. Mortars, it'll kill a creature, and then Ugin is just Ugin. So, with those options in mind, I go ahead and just take the Crater Maker out of their hand. It can kill an Ugin, it can deal 2 to a creature, it can kill a colorless non-land permanent. I don't want any of those things. I want to, in fact, try to attack my opponent's mana, and I'd really like to get Orcish Settlers down and then blow up all their lands and end this game. But unfortunately, the 3 cards that my opponent has, besides Mountain, were Orcish Settlers Killer, Orcish Settlers Killer, Orcish Settlers Killer. So it's going to be tough, but we're going to try. Anyway, so I run out here Fiery Confluence with my remaining mana, and I felt like this was just a little bit better than a Byforce. A Byforce would have killed the exact same 3 cards as a Fiery Confluence, and Byforce is a... but it's a cheaper card I can play next turn for 3 or 2 or 1 target, and then it will cost less than a Fiery Confluence on the next turn. So I'm thinking, a turn ahead here. And the reason I targeted all but the Clamp is I was really hoping my opponent would want to draw with this Tome of Legends. So by not targeting targeting the Tome and the other 2 big mana producers and leaving them with the treasure, I'm enticing them to do exactly what they did, sack the treasure to draw a card. But as always, remember, when they have cards, attack their mana. When they have mana, attack their cards. So my opponent is drawing an extra card, but they just sacked another mana source, which will make it even harder for them to leverage the cards that they're getting. And remember, one of those cards is Mountain, so that would be drop 4, and one is Ugin, right? So now my opponent can't really get to Ugin unless they draw like a mana crypt. It's much harder for them to get an Ugin into play on the next turn by encouraging them to sack their treasure so they could draw one extra card. So they have these 3 cards plus an unknown at this point. And unfortunately, I'm out of gas for now. I'm out of gas, but I'm out of I'm out of mana is what I'm out of. All right, so I'm going to discard. I'm going to throw away things that deal damage to me and things that don't really matter, given, like, Guild Artisan's time to shine is over. Arid Mesa can go. Blightstep can go. Dust Bowl, not too great against mono red. Scalding Tarn can go. And then Fiery Covenant can go. I'll keep the Shieldred in case I do. And the Chandra, so I have 2 different ways. I'm going to toss this, I think Toxic Deluge also. Yeah. And I'll keep, and of course those all get exiled because of the running Yawgmoth's Will. But I'll keep the Edict and the Chandra and the Ugin, so I have 3 different removal spells. So whatever my opponent top decks, if it's something really good like a Chandra, I can just deal with it. Alright, opponent plays land for the turn, and Rag, and they could, fortunately, they played it with Dash, so they don't have 5 mana this turn. Again, thanks to the Diamond, the token that they used to draw a card off Tome of Legends, which means they don't have enough mana to dash and then Mizzen Mortars away the Thrall token. So they're just going to dash and Clamp. This is a big mistake. This is the only mistake that I saw I'm a Donkey make, I think for the night, honestly. But this was actually a very big... Oh, is it Summoning Sick? Oh, they didn't have enough mana to even dash. They're just hard casting it and clamping. Never mind, this was not a mistake. But this was just a choice. It was a choice that they made to... it would have cost them 4 mana to dash, I guess. So they're just clamping to, get more cards and try to get up to Ugin and get something going. They can Ugin away my Tevesh and maybe get back in the game. They could draw a land and then... Well, they've got a land. They could... presumably in the next couple cards, like, we know of 2 of the 4, so presumably they'll have 6 cards in hand. One of them will be a land, and they could Vandal Blast, boom, and get back into this game, follow it up with an Ugin on my Tevesh, and, game on or whatever. It's a long shot. But they could also, like, Wheel of Fortune or do some other crazy stuff. Maybe they have a combo. They definitely should not concede here. But, obviously, things are looking pretty grim for them. And as it turns out, having access to this Thrall really nice for me. Now I'm going to actually drop down to 9 here if I lose the flip, and my life will continue to decline. So the other reason for me to keep the Bifrost was that at some point I may need to kill my own Mana Crypt. And I don't lose the flip there. Rograkh is a relief to see. Let's go ahead and attack and get a counter first. And then I'm going to duress them. And in this case, I take Ugin. So this is what we saw. I'm going to pop that out. I take the Ugin out, and they've got 5 cards left. Mortars, that was from the first time I looked at it. So this is what they're left with. Shattering Pulse, which is a way to repeatedly destroy artifacts, especially if you're ahead. And if not, if you're behind, you just play it on 2. Mizzen Mortars, pretty interesting. Again, it's removal, but if you're ahead far enough, you can just, like, one-sided Wrath of God your opponent. Much like, it's sort of the equivalent of Fire Covenant. Chandra, they did have it, plus Raise, plus a Mountain. So I have to leave him with the Chandra because I'm quite worried about my opponent getting enough mana to play Ugin. And Ugin's more problematic for me than Chandra is, so I actually have to leave him with that, and I'm kind of sad to do it. Alright, so I'm going to draw extra cards. I find a Torque here. So if I play this correctly, so I tap for 6, I can play Ugin. Yeah. And then I can play the Torque for 0, which is really nice. But I can also exile the top card, just a Wasteland. That's fine. I have a colorless blocker in case my opponent wants to dash in Rag, although I also have Deadly Relic. But you never know. They could top deck... so my opponent top decks the deflective swat, and then dashes in with Rag next turn rather than doing like a Chandra play, then I can Spirit Token block. And I don't remember if they might not even have enough mana to do that, but I'm always trying to think about any possibility of what my opponent could do. They could top deck Ancient Tomb or whatever, so. Having said all that, I ultimately decide that the play for me is to go Chandra, add 2 mana, I believe. Yeah, and then go ahead and replay Rog, and I'll just use Rog as the blocker instead of my Spirit Token because I needed to use him for Springleaf Drum. All right. My opponent's turn. They're playing Mountain and then doing what? Tapping 4 and casting Chandra, I think. So Amadonkey has 4 mana, does play the Chandra, we can check that off. Leaving just Raise, Shattering Pulse, and Mism Mortars. So I'm kind of baiting also with just like hoping that Mortars gets played here at some point so that I can get the Settlers down. Opponent exiles a card rather than choosing to make mana, and exiles a Magus of the Moon. Would have killed my Saga, otherwise not really a big deal at all for me in this position. But they don't have enough mana. They can only use one or the other of Chandra's abilities, not both. And then from here makes a different play, but I do understand it at least. Plays Raise and destroys my Saga. They're really like not happy with me having a Saga. It does, you know, to their credit, produce a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 because of itself, 9 because of the gold token from attacking, 10 because I can torque something. So it does pump out a 10-10 next turn, and then after that a couple of 12-12s. So that's kind of a clock. So I do kind of understand this play. All right. So now we know exactly what's in the opponent's hand. Or no, check off Raise. We know 2 of the 3 cards. For my turn, I miss a land. I lose a flip, so I'm down to 10. Draw a deflecting swat, exile an honor-worn Shaku. Now I'm just feeling like I've got everything now. So we're going to go ahead and sack and just draw that Shaku immediately. And then this Soul Ring costs 0 due to Ugin, and the Shaku costs exactly 1. I can play it off my artifact mana producing land. I can Vamp and then Chandra into the card that I want to get. So what do you get here? For me, it was a pretty easy choice. Go ahead and back it up if you want to think about it further. But I decided that I'm just going to... I've already got 2 artifact mana floating and the ability to just make this play here. So I Chandra into God Pharaoh's statue, which will use the 2 mana from the workshop and cost 2 less due to the Ugin, and will tap for mana due to the Honor-Worn Shaku. Effectively, tap for mana. Alright, time to get Orcish Settlers down. And the reason I did that is I'm at 8 now. I'm a little bit worried about, you know, potentially dying. But from here, I've got the deflecting swat. So if my opponent draws a land, they can cast the Mortars, targeting the Settlers, using all their mana. And then I just deflecting swat it over to like the Spirit Token. But if I hadn't had the statue in play, and they drew a removal spell, then they could target my guy with Mortars, I deflecting swat, and then they bolt it in response or something, and I don't get the Settlers then. So finally, and here's where I make a huge screw up, and Amadonkey was actually really cool about it and gave me the game anyway. But I make a big screw up here. So I make Chandra into an artifact, so my intent is to kill this, this, and this. And I forget what the plan is, or I screw up. I'm using my guys for mana, and I kill the Clamp and the Chandra, and I don't kill my Mana Crypt. So now I'm on a clock and no artifact to kill. Not good. Not good at all. I don't know why I just put myself on this ridiculous clock. But, yeah. Alright. Alright, so my opponent does draw a land here, which means they can cast the Mortars. And And they go for mortars, of course, and then from there I just deflecting swat it over to the spirit token. So I'm going to get that wasteland in my hand. Next turn, even if I lose the flip and go to 5, I mean, I'm doing okay, right? I'm going to be able to Ugin and then like Tevesh, Szat, Rograkh. If this card under Ugin is artifact removal or a tutor, I'll Tevesh Szat that to get it into my hand. But if it's not, I'll Tevesh the Rograkh to draw 3. And of course, next turn my play is going to be to literally Armageddon every land my opponent has is going to destroy. You know, boom, 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 boom. It costs me 11 mana, but yeah, I've got 11 mana trivially at this point. So, you know, 2, 4. This thing right here taps for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mana. So got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. When I say trivially, I mean it. Gold tokens 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. I have like 22 mana next turn, so I can swing 11 to kill that and keep moving with my turn. So really it's just a question of mana crypt flips. And I guess Amadonkey didn't want to try to see if I would die to those or whatever. I do actually have to kill the mana crypt though, because I don't have Jitte. And I've burned my Yawgmoth's Will, and there's no other way for me to gain life in this deck. So at this point, I would need to solve that problem. But there's definitely a lot of ways to do it remaining in the deck. One of them would be Karn, and then just make it a creature. There's a lot of outs. But Amadonkey gives up, and an incredibly interesting game where my opponent has a blazingly fast start and breaks my back with a nasty Byforce for 5, a 6 mana just backbreaker, boom. But much like Batman, I'm able to, you know, rise again and defeat Bane in this case. Almost the bane of my existence in that particular game. So hopefully you enjoyed watching the Rograkh deck in action. You even got to see the Infernal Plunge and the Orcish Settlers do some work. And of course on those last couple turns where I'm trying not to die to Mana Crypt, if I drew the Praetor's Grasp, I could just tutor for a solution from my opponent to solve that problem. But alas, we don't get to see perfect play from me, but we got to see some pretty good play. And this is a great game, representative of my maxim, which is that you always give your opponent maximum opportunity to throw a game. Never give up on a game just because you're losing. Only give up if it is statistically or mathematically impossible to recover. Not if it's improbable. If it's 99 million to 1, keep playing. If it's 100% certain you cannot recover, well, that's another story. Then go ahead and concede, right? So, I mean, if you're like, I know the contents of my deck and there's literally nothing that can get me out of this, fine. But make sure you're certain, because you might have forgotten. I have done that to myself. I said, you know what, there's no way I can get out of this. And then I hit the draw card button after conceding. And the next card was literally the only card that would get me out of the situation. And I went, oh, all I had to do was draw a card. So, you know, this fortunately was the flip side to that. And you got to see the good side of not quitting. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed these games. Thank you very much for watching. We'll probably have some more games for you in the future. And we'll see you next time.